Hi, everyone. Welcome in as you enter the meeting tonight. Um, we will have, some people coming in as we go, and I've got a lovely co-host with me this evening, Patty Reese, who will be managing that, so I can focus on the information shared and just educating through our experience this evening or today, whatever the time is for you. As you know or may know, I'm notorious for saying tonight based on local time. I often forget that technology connects us at all different times of the day. So just welcome. I'm really glad you're here. This is a really important topic, a topic very near and dear to my heart. I'll go into reasons for that in just a few minutes, but I really want to pre-thank you for your time. I really want to pre-thank you for your attention. And also, I want to pre-thank you for your participation. I don't mean that as just being a viewer of the experience. I've set up our presentation, for lack of a better word, to actually be as engaging and interactive as possible without us vocalizing things throughout our time together. Somebody reached out and asked, how long is this webinar? And I actually don't know the answer to that. It really depends on how things flow. And if you need to get off, take care of yourself. Please, know that you have permission to do that. You don't need my permission to do that. But I'm going to guess this time together today will be roughly, I don't know, 60, 75 minutes. And what I will say is there's a lot of prompts for you to reflect. I'll be asking a lot of open-ended questions. And it also is an opportunity to utilize the chat function on this platform. Zoom has an amazing thing called chat. And if you look at your menu bar, you'll see there's an icon, and it looks like a comment icon or some kind of messaging icon. And if you're not familiar with it, open it up because there will be great opportunity not only to answer these open-ended questions that I'll be sharing, but also to communicate with each other. Just a little bit of education about how this chat function works. And you can private message anybody on the thread, or you can message everyone on the thread. And so, like I said, take advantage of that opportunity today. Take advantage of that opportunity to share important things or share meaningful things with your fellow participants because I really, truthfully, I only see myself as a messenger in this experience. I'm only an expert at my own personal life endeavors. I do credit myself for being a good listener and a good educator. However, I'm just communicating information in our time together today. And so, if you want some meaningful connection in our experience, utilize the chat function to communicate with others. There will be things that people will enter into the chat that will probably resonate with you. And if so, connect with them and take advantage of that opportunity. So, with that said, I believe we shall get started. We have our topic in front of us. It's titled Managing Depression and Grief. And there's going to be three parts to our experience this evening. If you saw an email communication from me, it had to do with basically three parts of a three-part process, a practical process. And I'll be the first to say it's going to come out sounding much simpler than it is. Uh, in theory, of course. So, first and foremost, I want to say this meeting is being recorded, and I just want to give you that fair warning. So, if I stop if I stop screen sharing and we go into some kind of uh, chart view, if you always have the power to turn off your video if you do not want to be seen. You have the power to change your name. in your title. All you have to do is click on your little name and you can change it right from there. And also, if you ever get to a point where you are uncomfortable, you do have your own capability to lead the meeting too. This meeting is being recorded for future use. Too many people have reached out and said, due to time constraints, such as being on the other side of the world, they were unable to attend because it's 2 a.m. where they are at this time. And however, they did really appreciate wanting to receive the information. And so I did decide to record it so that that information can be shared for future use. So with that said, um, what else? Another disclaimer, I guess, for lack of a better word. I just want to say that my everything about this time together today, it's designed to help inform and to help educate you as somebody who may be experiencing grief and or depression for yourself, or maybe here to learn the information because you care deeply about someone who you think may be battling grief and or depression itself. I do want to say this information shared at this time is not to provide medical advice. And please always consult your doctor when it comes to your personal health, your individual personal health. So thank you for that. And here's the three parts of what we'll be quote unquote discussing today. And like I said, it's simple in theory, but we'll go into details about each part. The first part, we're going to focus on how to name it. What is depression and grief related symptoms? How similar are they? How are they different? Personal stories about from myself and from people that I support as far as how they came to a place of naming grief and or depression as part of their experience. Part two, owning it, ending the stigma, and helping to normalize this experience because, as you'll hear me say later, this is indeed a natural and normal process in everyone's lives. And then the third part, managing it, which are practical tips for how to manage, how to cope, and as a lot of people say, just deal with these difficult emotional experiences. Now, in addition to having like an agenda for the topic of conversation, there are intentions. Intentions for me are very important things in life. I consider myself an intentional person, and how I define intention is almost like just being deeply focused and deeply committed to being a certain way or doing something a certain way. And so I have three intentions for our experience together today. The first is to connect, to help connect through the power of story. And please, like I said at the very beginning, utilize the chat function to connect. I'm also intending to help normalize the difficult emotions, as I said just a moment ago. And that's critically important. I think, if anything, that I really want to help come across is that I'm just glad you're here, all 50 of us, at this time, in order to understand that this is normal and natural. And then also the practical tools, just offer these tips of something to do, something to lean on and rely on when the feelings become overwhelming. So, how about that? How do you like those for intentions? In addition to the chat, Zoom, I'll say very technically, real quick, there's also on your panel, there's a thing that's I believe it's called reactions. And so, give me a thumbs up, give me a wave, give me a heart, give me anything at any time if you find yourself resonating with the information or the feeling that you're getting at the time. Like, for example, give me a thumbs up if you want to hear more about or experience the normalizing of this difficult process and these difficult emotions, because you'll get that. So thank you very much. I'm going to say a little bit about myself. So my name's Reed, and I don't know if it was 4 years ago or somewhere around that time, I started this thing called Grief Refuge. And so what I was intending to do was to create a platform in itself where people could come and they could really just be their true selves. When I first started better understanding how to navigate my own grief journey and how to support others in navigating theirs, I realized there was one thing about grief that I respected almost more than anything else in life, and that was you can't hide from it. You really can't, because the more you do, the more it just lingers and hangs out as a shadow. And then it's just something that you really need to endure, embrace, show up for, whatever the right words are for you, and literally go through it. And everybody's process is different, of course. But I had such a deep level of respect for that in life, because I was like, that not only is it just something that really is hard and is painful and something to endure. No, I'm not a martyr, but it's something that helps us really embrace our authentic experience. You'll hear the word stigma later in the presentation. And I just think that the difficult things in our lives and in American culture specifically, just because I'm not as familiar with other cultures, is that we tend to really focus and lean towards on the good, uh, you know, uh, or triumphs and the hero's journey. And I think there's a lot of value and truth to that in and of itself. And at the same time, I just think that there isn't enough space given to pain, to sadness, to depression. And these are really what helps make us authentic. They really make us real people. And so Grief Refuge, I said, I've got to do something about this. And Grief Refuge was kind of my manifestation of how to provide a platform for that. And in addition to Grief Refuge as its platform, there is a mobile application. Hopefully you use it. It is called Grief Refuge. It's on your app store on your phone. And I'm just really proud of that, because I think that with the Grief Refuge app, there's daily support. And that's really what the focus was for making that app. Just wanting to make sure that somebody had something to go to at any time of the day, whether it was 3 a.m. for them, it was 9:30, it was after lunch, anytime. And then there would be something there that could help validate the experience that they were going through with Grief Refuge. So I'm going to say three things about myself. As you can see here, you probably read them already, but I do identify as a highly sensitive person. And if you don't know what that means, it just means that some of the senses, that we all encounter or that we have in our lives, um, there's a little bit more intensity to some of these experiences. For me, it happens to be sound. I'm extremely sensitive to sound, but it's not only sound. It's there's many experiences, especially with process and emotions. Highly sensitive people tend to feel it a little bit more intensely and or deeply, and it can create a lot of challenges in life. I'll be the first to say that. What got me on my path to learning more about the journey through grief, each person's journey through grief. Uh, my backstory ties in with the loss of both my father, my biological father, and my stepfather. And to sum that up in probably two sentences, it was two physical deaths and four different types of relationships that I lost. And so that in and of itself, the math doesn't quite add up. And I've always said it's made matters quite complicated, especially if you tie in my personality as far as a highly sensitive person and that. The other thing I'm going to share with you today is that I honestly do struggle with depression and my grief. Um, my biological father he hasn't been in his physical body for over 15 years. And there are times where I will go into very quiet isolation. I'll think about him. I'll think about the relationship I always wanted with him that I never had. And I'll think about the relationship that I always had. And I'll definitely feel a lot of blue, a lot of melancholy, a lot of sadness because I've always wanted it to be different. And that's not the only reason for my depressive episodes, but as far as our topic tonight or today, grief and depression, it is probably a very common thread as far as those experiences. So those are, what you're getting from me in our experience today, if anything, is authentic. I'll be probably doing more opening up than what I think I've done in any past presentations I've ever provided. And like I said at the very beginning, it's because this topic is something very near and dear to my heart. It's something I'm very close to, something that is a very strong personal experience. So I can share a lot of my own stories in addition to client stories, which you'll hear some of that tonight. So, um, what about you? So we got this chat function, and some of you I can see that you have been using it, and I thank you for that. And so I'm gonna make an invitation to you at this time right now, as long as you feel comfortable, of course, to share a little bit about yourself. It doesn't have to be deep. It doesn't have to be personal. It could be as simple as, what your day was like today. Or it could be as little, where you're calling in from at this time. Where in the world are you? So, you know, throw out something to the chat and let us know a little bit about yourself. And, you'll maybe somebody will reach out and say, for example, oh, I'm in the Portland area too. And so, that can be an invitation to do a little bit of personal connecting. So, please share, something about your day or something about you, as far as this chat. So we're getting notes as far as from where people are from. So as you can see, people are in on the call from Florida and Washington and California and Texas, Missouri, living near Seattle, Florida too. So it's great. And hey, for anybody who's on Mountain Time, I just want to say I'm so sorry because I know that this is right in the heart of your supper or dinner time. I'm currently in Portland, Oregon, on Pacific time. And I know for the East Coasters, it's getting a little late. But hey, you do a lot of late things out there. I was actually on Eastern time just for the past 8 months and recently transitioned over to Portland. And so dealing with those time changes is never easy. And I wish it could all work for everyone at the same time. But I'm just glad you're here. And it's good to see you using the chat and sharing more about yourself. And I'm going to say one more thing about this chat because I'm so stuck on it is I have a wonderful co-host tonight, Patty Reese. And you may not see or hear from her today, but if you ever feel so inclined to ask any questions at any time, Patty's going to be moderating these questions. So we have three themes or three parts to this webinar today. And if you have any questions during any part, just fire them off into the chat. And Patty's going to curate them. And Patty's going to make sure that, our questions are answered before we move on to the next part. So we're taking care of you. So there's going to be a few quotes, and we're going to start off with this quote. And I'm going to ask for a reaction. Today, my forest is dark, the trees are sad, and all the butterflies have broken wings. So heart it, thumbs up it, any type of reaction if you find this to resonate with part of your experience at this current time. Oops, I jumped ahead. So I'm going to start with an opening story. And let's see if I can share this screen so I can give you a visual. There's a lot of things on my screen, so here we go. So I'm gonna see if I can make this bigger. For some reason, here we go. There we go. So I wanted to share the visual of the opening story. Now, why did I choose this topic? As you know, it's very personal to me. But in this current phase of time, specifically post Thanksgiving holiday in the US on the end of November, I started seeing a lot more people reaching out to me. And a lot of people were sharing emails, they were filling forms on the Grief Refuge website, and they were sharing things that sounded extremely painful. And a lot of times when I read these, my heart just kind of sinks into my stomach. And I say to myself, what can I do? Almost every message I get, what can I do to help without obviously taking somebody's pain away, but just to be a great resource of support and to provide as much help as possible. And so that's actually why this topic came to mind. I was like, okay, I'm getting these messages. They're they're very they're very hard to hear, and a lot of people are using the word depressed. And so I'm like, okay, it's time to talk more about this. So that's why we're here now. And this is literally cut and pasted from an email message from somebody who reached out to me recently. I'm going to say this person reached out probably 12 or 14 days ago. So from this email, this person shares, I bottle everything up. And then when I'm so overwhelmed and I've held so much in for so long, I finally break. And when I break, I fully break. I go into severe panic attacks, so much I feel I just want to be with my loved one. I just miss them so much. And day by day, it's just getting worse. I'm getting more and more not okay. I'm getting more and more depressed, and I struggle to connect with others way more than before because I'm just so scared that they're going to die too. It's so hard for me to talk to others and reach out, and I can barely get just out of bed every day anymore. I stopped doing the things I love. I stopped doing things that help me, and I tried some not so good coping skills for a while after my mom passed, but stopped those and now just struggle. Struggle to get through each day without doing something I know I'll regret or something that will hurt my friends and my family. I just want to be okay again. I want to be myself again. I want to do things I love and be in nature without just breaking down or not having the energy. I want to be able to connect with others again. I don't want to feel alone anymore. And I've tried YouTube options. I've tried a few options that have done nothing. I don't have all the crazy money for therapy. I struggle to reach out to friends and family because I don't want them to know I'm not okay. Although it's getting harder and harder to keep being everyone else's rock when I cannot even be or have my own. So it was actually very challenging to read that just because I don't know, the feelers started setting in for me. And I'm curious how much of this resonates for you. You can share in the chat, you can use your reaction. Just so curious, how much this experience feels or sounds somewhat. similar to your own. Now, as I said that I sometimes struggle with my own depression, I actually was in a depressive episode probably the first 3 weeks of November. And I was in a rural area of Cleveland, Ohio at the time. And my wife and I were very isolated. We were long backstory, but we were at her grandparents' home because it's vacant, and we were looking into purchasing it, and we didn't know anybody in that area, and it was just the two of us. So, getting along as much as possible, but we were overcome by the amount of grief in the environment where we were because there was almost nothing in the home, but yet anything that remained reminded my wife of her grandparents. And so the long and the short of this personal story is that being in this space was filled with grief. Every time we went outside and we looked at, the ravine across the way, um, grief would sink in our chests. There was something about being there at night because the lighting wasn't necessarily the greatest and brightest. So there was dim lights and it was just darker. And that environmental mirroring almost had an impact on my own psyche. And so there was a couple, there was some times where I was like just a real big jerk to my wife. And I think I was being very self-protective. And I was, struggling with the emotions that I was feeling. And it finally got to a point where I was like, I remember sitting at the work desk I had, must have been like 10 a.m. in the morning, and I was trying to work and I couldn't concentrate. And I said to myself, I I'm really depressed. And so that was like almost like a big light bulb moment for me. And I'll share a little bit more about that um, as we progress. So another opportunity to share in the chat if you want to comment on this question. We heard the opening story from, we'll just call her Erin. I actually don't know her real name, but we heard the opening story from Erin, and I asked how much it resonated. I'm going to ask you this question now. If you reflect on your loss and or your losses, I'm so curious if you're willing to share in the chat, what in your life has changed as a result of these losses? Loss of relationship, loss of connection, moods. And my chat disappeared, so I need to find it. Well, I apologize. I can't see it and I don't know where it went. It's hard to, with one screen, it's hard to like have all these different things open. But yeah, reflect on that for just a moment and please, share. And again, if something resonates with someone, this is an opportunity to share write them a personal message or again, if you have questions along the way, please send them to everyone and Patty will curate them for us. Now, a follow-up question to some of that reflection. How are you responding to these unwanted changes? The first assumption is that it's, creating feelings of pain. It's creating feelings of depression or deep sadness, and that's very okay. As long as you're being honest with yourself, regardless of whether you share it in the chat or you keep it to yourself, just reflect on that for a moment. Because throughout the rest of our time together today, I'm confident that there will be like some shifting, some opening of energy, as I like to say. Want to share another thing. Um, I found this just in preparation of this time together. And this company out of Australia does these beautiful videos. And I'm going to share this story from Eddie that what's called as Beyond Blue. Eddie had opened up to some of his own grief and depression, and I found it very fitting. So this, 3-minute video I'd like to share with you today. And um, Patty, chime in and ping me if the sound doesn't play. I think it would, but please let me know.
I didn't do much about the grief of my father, and that's, I believe, where a lot of my mental illness problems began. Dad was he was a tough old fellow. He was a hard farmer. But long after I turned 18, Dad passed away, and suddenly there was me and Mum to run the farm and get on with that part of life. Nobody said, how are you feeling with your dad passing and that sort of thing. And I don't think I started really grieving until I started to get really, really ill with my depression. And I started to make excuses of not going to footy train anymore. Very often after lunch, I go back to the paddock and just go to sleep in my bed or something. So I'm not tell anybody what's going on. And it was becoming very apparent that the farm wasn't going well. And I had been seeing our local doctor, but I wasn't presenting well. I wasn't telling him the whole story. And he just said, look, it's just stress. You're probably best off getting off the farm. I promised Dad I would stay and look after Mum and the farm and all that sort of thing. He didn't do that. And in my mind, that was a failure. And I started to really hate myself for doing it. When we moved over here to Queensland to get away from the problems and leave them behind, they did try a while and came back. I'd been in hospital in 2008 in Toowoomba, in the acute mental health unit there. Nearly 12 months to the day, I was back in that hospital again. I didn't care where they put me, what they did with me. I was at the lowest I'd ever been. I just had pretty much given up on myself and life. Next day, a psychiatrist came in and he said, I think the best thing we can do is give you ECT, which is electroconvulsive therapy. And that afternoon, when I woke up, I felt slightly brighter about life. I do believe it was a real turning point in my life, like a wake-up call of these things. I've been thinking all of my life, I failed as a man, I haven't kept promises, I've sold the farm, I failed. And I thought, maybe I haven't. Maybe this thing that I've got is something that we can change, because these people have done something physical to something that I thought was just something wrong with my character, something wrong with my mind. But I feel better today. Grief is something that we all experience in life, but we just need to be taught the skills to get through that. Because if we don't do something about it, like I say, come back and bite you 10 years, 15 years back down the track. I still grieve now. It's been nearly 40 years since Dad passed away, and the pain is still there, but it's definitely not what it was. Loss was living. I'm seeing things in my life that probably wouldn't have been in this last decade if I had done what I was planning to do.
So I do see that it was difficult for many people to hear the audio, and I apologize for that. I don't know if that's something in the Zoom setting or what, or if it's a personal device thing. So what I'm doing is I'm dropping the link to this video in the chat, so that you have it as a reference. What I'll sum up as some key points in Eddie's story and his sharing was that what really stood out was he named his grief and he named his depression, and he ended up working with someone to get electroconvulsive therapy. So I don't know if that's shocking or getting shocked or not. But what I will say is that he, for a while of his life, he always thought there was something wrong with him. And I think that's a very common thing that people experiencing deep grief, people experiencing depression, and people experiencing grief and depression often encounter because we all know it. You go outside and the rest of the world pretends like everything is great or everything is fine, at least in some areas. And so and so it's very isolating and you end up feeling like something's wrong with you. And Eddie articulated that well. And then in addition to what he said regarding that, he also said something about 40 years later, he still grieves the loss of his dad. And that was really important in standing out because as I believe all of us here know in our time together now, we don't necessarily, grief never really goes away. The feeling of it changes, but at any time you may be hit with moments of what we call in the school of thought where I come from, grief bursts and or grief waves. So in part one, it's really about recognizing and naming this depression and grief. And it's doing it without, self-judgment. And so you may ask yourself, what's the difference? And I think the answer to that is it's a gray line. I do have a couple slides that I'm going to show some symptoms of grief. I'm going to show some symptoms of depression and compare the two. So I pulled this up from the Cleveland Clinic. This is shared on their website. And what is there? Two, four, five items here that are technically symptoms of grief. And first is confusion. There's trouble thinking or making decisions. There's the feeling as if you've lost a sense of hope or direction. There's difficulty focusing on anything other than your loss. And there's difficulty remembering or keeping track of your responsibilities. So that's grief. And, hey, reaction time. Give me a thumbs up if that sounds familiar. So there's symptoms of depression. And I intentionally pulled from a different provider, a medical provider. In this case, it's from the Mayo Clinic, because I'm like, well, let's compare and contrast the two. My scientific mind took over for a second. And check this out. I took, what is it, four? Yeah, four symptoms, and they say the feelings of sadness, cheerfulness, emptiness, or hopelessness, tiredness and lack of energy. So even small tasks take that extra effort. Trouble thinking, trouble concentrating, trouble making decisions and or remembering things, and the loss of interest or pleasure in most all normal activities. And so I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I found myself bouncing back and forth because I'm like, these almost sound somewhat interchangeable. And so this next slide here's your proof. I'm like, wow. So on the left, we've got grief, and that was provided by the Cleveland Clinic. And on the right, we've got depression provided by the Mayo Clinic. And I'm like, look at these. I mean, if you just skim these, you see so many of the same words in each of the columns. So, like I said before, it is a gray area. It's, there's no distinct line drawn in the sand as far as, hey, I'm only grieving or I'm only depressed. There's a lot of interchangeable experiences, and there's a lot of depression in grief. So, how can we tell the difference? And I just did a little bit of research on this. And so I came up with three ways. If you really want to know how to distinguish the difference between the two, it's gonna be subjective to your personal experience. But first, look for your level of consistency. And what I mean by that is, are you recognizing that you're experiencing up and downs in some levels of enjoyment or levels of sadness or somewhere in between? Um, or is it kind of like an all or nothing thing? Is there no enjoyment in the activity or the event that you're experiencing? If it's the latter, that's, could be a fair signal to you that it could be more depression than grief-related depression. So also track your level, your level of engagement. With your level of engagement, think about this. Ask yourself, is the engagement, like for example, this webinar right now, the interaction, the listening, the thinking, the reflecting, that level of engagement, does it provide some relief to you? Like, do you recognize that your energy feels a little bit different, perhaps a little bit more interested and or excited? Or, do you still find yourself like not really having any desire to engage with anyone? And chances are, if the latter is more true for you, it could be an indicator of more severe depression and less grief-related depression. And then the third point here is the focal points. So what I mean by that is, what are you focusing on? So if you're recognizing these feelings of depression, and you say to yourself, or you were to take a half a step back and look at, what you're focusing on, is that level of focus related to your loss or your losses? For example, if it's all spouse related and you lost your spouse, or is that focus more on you? And not only is it just on you, is it on you in a negative way? Is there a lot of self-judgment, a lot of self-defeatedness, a lot of self-hatred? Chances are those types of focusings on the self are less about grief and more about depression itself. So in part one, as the recap here, naming and recognizing depression and grief, I want to say this. The feelings, specifically depression-related grief, we know this can be air quotes around too uncomfortable. It can be too uncomfortable to feel. Grief and depression can be hard to name because a lot of people out there in your social settings and public, at work, wherever, it's not liked or it's not accepted by people in your life. And that's that stigma of depression and or grief being unattractive and unreliable. And then also difficulty in naming or recognizing depression related grief is, from my own personal experience, it's not really something you grow used to. Like Eddie said, he felt there was something wrong with him. It's not, you just don't embrace it or accept it. You're always kind of fighting it, and that's draining energy in and of itself. And last and not the least, with grief and depression, it can just be too easy to feel a sense of shame, self-doubt, and even self-hatred. So I'm going to pause there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let's open up to Patty to see if there's any part one unanswered questions here. Patty, can you unmute yourself?
There you go. Oh gosh, you guys are terrific in the chat. So many broken hearts, so many deep, deep stories. I really honor where each of you are and the things that you've shared with us in the chat. No unanswered questions, but lots of tremendous depth.
Okay. Well, hey, thank you, everyone. Appreciate you utilizing that chat. I just hope that you're feeling comfort in doing so. And so continue to do it. There will be a lot more opportunities for the rest of our time together. Thank you, Patty. I'm going to go back into sharing my screen and let's see. We'll go into part two. So we went from naming it and or recognizing it, and now we're going to step into owning it. Okay, owning it. Starting off with a quote. I wanted to write down exactly what I felt, but somehow the paper stayed empty and I could not have described it any better. I just think that's beautifully articulated as a metaphor. The emptiness inside. It's manifested as the emptiness on the paper. So give me a thumbs up if you felt like you've experienced something in that regard. Have you found yourself not having the words or not having the articulation of your personal experience? Part two, owning it, is a little bit shorter. So there's a few ways that you can manifest owning grief and depression as part of your experience without some of those aforementioned other feelings such as self-doubt or self-blame in part one. So first and foremost, I said this in the introduction, but listen, you're a normal grieving person. Um, Despite no matter what kind of false image or false presentation that the world portrays, the hero's journey. I love the hero's journey because I'm a storyteller. But at the same time, like a lot of life experience isn't always about triumph. A lot of it is struggle. And so being a normal grieving person, it's a reality. And so I just want to make sure that that is said perhaps a dozen times in our time together today. So it's kind of ingrained, it can become a personal mantra. I'm a normal grieving person, no matter how deep the feelings are or how hard or painful it is. I'm a normal grieving person. One of the things, as far as semantics, is, kind of the stories you're telling yourself. So when I shared that personal experience of being in the Ohio area and recognizing that I was experiencing a deep depressive episode, I'm proud to say now that as I reflect on that moment, I told myself I feel depressed, and I've refrained from saying I am depressed. There's a huge difference in that because it's what you identify with. So feeling a certain way, it's a little bit less burdensome or self-burdensome and in a little bit less of like a personal responsibility. But if you own up and you say something like, I am depressed or I'm a loser or I can't, there's something wrong with me, that's a lot of heavier weight and heavier expectation upon yourself. And that can create more pain. So that could, if you believe that there can be cycles of emotions, it could dig the hole deeper as a metaphor, for example. So Alan Wolfelt, he's a mentor of mine. I've learned a lot from him as far as being a grief support person. And he has this beautiful, I don't even know what to call it, but it's a kind of a philosophy, if you will. He calls it the six needs of mourning. And need number two in the six needs, and they're not necessarily chronological. You don't need to experience level one or one, the first one before this one here. But his second need is embrace the pain of the loss. And I'm actually going to share that. I've got that in my notes. So as I read it, where are you? Oh, here it is. And let me see if I can increase this for you. There you go. So this is directly from Alan's website, the Center for Loss. And Patty, if possible, could you throw the link to Ellen's Center for Loss in the chat? I just don't have it handy. And need number two is embrace the pain of your loss. And I'm just going to read this here with us live. This need of mourning requires us to embrace the pain of our loss, something we naturally don't want to do. It is easier to avoid, repress, or deny the pain of grief than it is to confront it. Yet it is, yet it is, yet it is in confronting and expressing our pain that we learn to reconcile ourselves to it. You will probably discover that you need to dose yourself in embracing your pain. In other words, you cannot, nor should you try to, overload yourself with the hurt all at one time. Sometimes you may need to distract yourself from the pain of the death, while at other times you will need to create a safe place to move toward it. Unfortunately, our culture tends to encourage the denial of pain. If you openly express your feelings of grief, misinformed friends may advise you to, quote, carry on or, quote, keep your chin up. If, on the other hand, you remain strong and in control, you may be congratulated for doing well with your grief. Actually, doing well with your grief means becoming well acquainted with your pain. I love that last sentence. It just sums everything up perfectly. It just needs, it has so much value. And I wish I could share, story after story about like people I've worked with when they've transitioned to embracing the pain of their loss. It's an amazing transformation. It's like it's almost like a paradigm shift of like their own belief systems, where they have lived life in some form of denial or some form of pretend to well, like Alan said, carry on, just be strong. And they get uh what's the word? The word slipped my mind, but they keep getting validated on that from the rest of society. Oh, you're so strong, you're so strong. Well, I'm guessing many of you have been told you're strong, and that's not necessarily the real, the truth of your own experience. You go home, you think about it, you remember it, the person saying you're so strong, and you actually almost feel worse. I've heard that a million times. I'm actually going to share another brief story from this is a real client. Um, this is from a client of who I continue to work with, and I'm going to call her Lisa to protect her name. And Lisa continues to amaze me. She's got a lot of health challenges that she's enduring right now, but she came to me about her own grief. And so here's the story of Lisa. I work with a woman who reached out to me because she was grieving the loss of her father. She was afraid of what skeletons would come out of her closet that were tied to their dysfunctional and estranged relationship, and was even more afraid of falling into a clinical depression again. I remember in our first conversation, she asked, how do I get past all this? It wasn't, or sorry, it was a question I could not answer. I've never known of a way to get past grief, past the sadness or the hopelessness. I've only known of ways to work through these emotions related to loss. I did my best to help her understand that, but I knew she wouldn't fully embrace the approach right away. It's not just something you hear once and say, okay, I'm now going to think this way. She was hurting. She was afraid, and she was untrusting of pretty much anything except her own intuition. Through many conversations of talking about her emotions, talking about movies, talking about her passions, her family relationships, her health, her passion for traveling, and even more sharings about life in general, she's in a place where she now understands that she can't get past or even around the pain of her losses. She needs to go through them or work through them. And what I learned from her is that she needed to trust. She needed to trust me. She needed to trust others, but she needed to trust herself. And her gaining trust in me wasn't going to happen by only talking about her and what she felt. She needed to hear things about my personal navigational stories, how I navigated losses, grief, depression in this world. I realized I had to open up to her because she was so afraid of falling back into the darkest place she's ever been. And that was her way of describing clinical depression. We had many conversations about the value of depression itself. I never wanted to tell her that she would grow from the experience of depression, but I did want her to know that from my own personal experience, amazingly creative things can sprout from depressive episodes. I gave her several examples throughout our weekly phone calls. She's listened to them. She's challenged me on them, but she no longer dismisses them. She uses them as inspiration for ways to face her feelings of despair and sadness and tend to her depression as she works through her grief. Now, with Lisa, I've witnessed transformation. She's a beautiful person. She has learned ways to reshape her beliefs about grief and about depression. She's found ways to own what she's feeling, and it's helping her cope with what is arguably the most difficult time of her life right now. Okay, there's two more of these owning it, owning grief and depression as something normal and natural in your life, and that's refusing to subscribe to the stigma. I like the word subscribe because I think we have a lot of free will in life and we have a lot of choice. And, I'm not talking about I choose to be happy right now, but I am talking about I choose to believe something that is essentially some BS. You have that power. And so I encourage you to refuse to subscribe to the stigma of grief and depression as it not being attractive or unappealing. And then, based on choice, choosing to feel what's real. And so I'm not talking about medication. If you're taking medication for depression, you have my full support. I think there is a purpose for everything that exists. And that purpose could be, for what you're going through. But what I'm trying to say is remaining and staying connected with what feels authentic to you. I've heard so many stories of people say, I never wanted to take antidepressants for my depression. I knew it was grief related and I knew I needed to like feel my way through it. And I think that's really brave. And if that's, part of your story too, I really commend you for your bravery and your courage to choose to feel what's real. So another opportunity to share some comments in the chat. This question is, if there's one thing you can do right now at this time where it helps you be a little bit more open to your grief and your depression, and not just open to it as it existing, but open as a natural, normal part of your life. What idea comes to mind right now? So curious. Please share in your answer or your comment in the chat. Okay, so that we'll stop and pause for part two. And Patty, wonderful co-host Patty Reese, is there anything left unaddressed that we can talk about for owning up to grief and depression as part of the experience?
Again, no specific questions, but lots of wonderful comments about semantics, choosing to use the words that we use to describe what's happening to us. And there were some comments about the words that people use to talk to us, that they're not as helpful sometimes as we'd like them to be.
For sure. Yeah. So if if you haven't combed through the chat, and I strongly encourage you, comb through it, see somebody's comment, and connect with them. Share a private reply to them. Y'all are fired up in this chat. I'm seeing how many new messages because I can't filter or I can't look at the messages while I present, but y'all are fired up and I really appreciate it. It's really cool to see you connecting. That was one of the intentions, and thank you. I'm just really grateful. So bear with me. I think we've got about 10 more, 15 more minutes into our third part, which is managing grief and depression. And we'll share some important things. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen and continue with the presentation. So here we are at the beginning of part 3, managing it. We'll start with a new quote. And so the word strong, no one realizes how strong someone feeling depressed has to be just to do daily stuff like showering, brushing their hair, getting out of bed. So that, if anything, that's a normal part of the experience when you're grieving and or feeling very depressed while grieving. So I'm going to go back to Eddie because there's actually a follow-up to his thing, and I'm going to drop the link in the chat first. Let's see. Yeah. And so I've turned up my volume settings. So chances are, if you on the receiving end are having a hard time hearing this, you might need to turn up your volume. But let me throw this in the chat real quick. Here's the link. You can click on it and then, watch it after the meeting's over or something. But Eddie follows up with how he connects with others.
I was born in Western Australia on a family farm back in Clondidden, little place about 350 kilometres east of Perth. I was the youngest of 4 kids, and I guess growing up in those years for my father was always helping on after school and before school. There was always something to help my father. He was a tough old fellow. He was a hard farmer. Not long after I turned 18, Dad passed away, and suddenly there was me and Mum to run the farm and get on with that part of life. I didn't do much about the grief of my father, and that's, I believe, where a lot of my mental illness problems began. We were friends with the local butcher in town, and his wife said, some of the things that I see in you are similar to what I've just been through. And she said, I've been off and seen this doctor. You probably benefit from seeing him as well. And the things she was describing to me, you seem very down, you don't seem very interested in withdrawing from footy and all that sort of stuff. Strike a chord. I'm living my life now. I didn't know either of my grandfathers growing up, so I go the extra mile to make sure that my granddaughters remember their grandfather, their nanny as well. And to celebrate that, each grandchild gets 2 birthday trees in our backyard that flare on their birthday. And we go bike riding, we go near the parks, we do all sorts of stuff together. And it's been life-changing and help them through life to explain what life's about. If, there's a dark moment in your life, to explain what that is. How do you feel now you're from this? Nobody did that. That's why I do what I do. Keep on doing that. I do not remember my father telling me that he loved me, and I do not remember telling him. When I speak to my son, it very often ends with, I love you, Dad, I love you, mate. And so it's a lovely and wonderful thing to hear someone say, I love you, Dad. It's really good. It's great to be able to reciprocate that. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Reach out to those that you know can help. Find someone that you can talk to. Go and have a chat like with all of her, whoever it is, because it can be a very lonely life. And I think loneliness only engenders more loneliness.
All right. So, Eddie shared a little bit more about, some of the ways he managed things. Some of it was repetitive to the first video, but, simply said, he says, find someone you can talk to. And it's really important to, connect with others. And that's why I'm really glad you're utilizing the chat. But I'm going to ask another question for those that have stayed on, and so curious what your most helpful ways of managing grief and depression are at this time. And I ask you to be kind to yourself in answering the question. And as you reflect on that and share or not share in the chat, I'm going to proceed to sharing. These are actually, so simple and practical as far as things, but don't underestimate their power. Truthfully, I'll share a personal story about my own experience for the last one, but when just Googling anything, anybody that or I'm sorry, any professional, like I looked at, truthfully, I looked at probably a dozen different sources, and these were the four most common themes of ways of getting support or learning how to manage it. And the number one was join a support group. And so I hope that you're in a support group at this time if you need it. And, the support group doesn't have to necessarily be, like some professional as far as, being the facilitator. It could be peer-led. It could be, a book club that talks about really deep and meaningful topics. That is a support group. I mean, a group of people is a group. Now, support groups are, I'll be honest, I personally think they're very hit or miss. Some are great and some are not. And so I encourage you, if you've tried a support group and it may have sucked for you, um, don't stop. Don't give up because just because that group didn't, wasn't a good fit for you, it doesn't necessarily mean other groups won't be. So, look, ask. There's a lot of resources now available all online, and just a simple inquiry or even an email to myself, I might be able to share a resource or two if I can be of further support. Journaling, a lot of people that don't like to voice what they're feeling around others, they can, writing things. The Grief Refuge app has a journal feature in it. And so, you can enter in your entries on the app itself if you don't want to put pen to paper or keep like some kind of other type of journal outside. So that's a resource. Sometimes journaling, especially, highly sensitive and introverted, writing things down can help me feel better, but it doesn't necessarily drain my energy. Whereas, being around other people and being engaged in the group dynamic, I find myself more tired after the experience is over than as if I were journaling. And exercise, hey, I know it's hard and I know that there may be no motivation or no energy, but I kid you not, ask somebody in your life to just be like a walk partner, accountability partner, someone you can go for a walk with all the time. When I was in the depressive episode back in the Ohio area, I did two things. When I gave the example of naming it, I said, I feel depressed. And I had this personal mantra where I said, I may feel depressed now, but I know I won't feel this way forever. And I kept repeating that to myself in the times that I was feeling really, really crappy, like really down. I was like, I need to do something to be, my own best friend at this time. And so I was like, I may feel depressed now, but I know I won't always feel this way. And I would force myself to walk up and down those prairie roads. There wasn't really anything to look at except, and I just said to myself, it was another mantra. I was like, I would look up at the sky, and that's critical. Don't look down at your feet. Look up at the sky because that physical shift in your body posture can help impact some of your brain functioning. I would look up at the sky and I would say, I'm going to walk myself through this. And that it was as simple as that. And things like that can be very powerful. But move your body. And if you're, physically unable to move your body, if there's something limiting or inhibiting, or you just don't have the energy or the motivation, do anything to get yourself to sweat. Um, Try to, take a sauna or a hot tub or I mean, what else? Those types of things. I personally believe that if you're sweating, um, you're eliminating some of this stuff. Some people call it toxins, some people call it I don't know what else other people call it, but I believe that these things contribute to feeling depressed. And if you're sweating them out of your body, it can help alleviate some of like that heaviness to the experience. And then the breath work is extremely powerful, and there's actually a lot of professionals that facilitate breath work experience. But as a simple example, I'll say this. Some of you may know about box breathing. That's like, counting to four as you inhale, as you pause, as you exhale, as you um, pause again. I actually like a personal type of breath work where no matter how long your inhale is, let's say you inhale for a count of four, try to double it on your exhale. Because I personally believe that when you put all your focus on your exhale, that is such a greater invitation to release the energy that is feeling stuck inside of you. You can visualize things leaving your body. If some of you remember the movie The Green Mile, there was that one guy who had those healing powers. He took in bad energy and then he could exhale it into what looked like little bugs or something. Um, you can visualize something like that. But the point is to really connect into that sensation and that feeling of something leaving your body on your exhale. I've done it many times, and in my personal experience, it's helped me feel that much lighter. So those are some of ways that you can, practically do things to help manage your own grief and or depression. Another opportunity to share a comment in the chat. I shared four here. You might have thought of already a few other different ones, but what's one new thing that you can do at this time to help manage grief and or depression? And if you feel so inclined, share it in the chat because chances are what you thought of may be helpful, valuable, and or supportive to someone else. So please, please share. All right, I'm going to go back and check in, stop sharing, and check in with Patty. Patty, we're at
Hey,
the
Reed. Oh
read.
my gosh, our chat is amazing. There are
Thank
so
you,
many different
everyone.
ones. Yes, I really appreciate everyone's contributions. I loved Julie, who had to leave earlier, had to leave early before we were finished, suggested that when she finds there are too many words to write in her journal, like they're coming too fast in her head for her to write, she sends herself an audio message so she could dissect it later. I thought that was very unique. Melinda mentioned that she's hesitating to reach out because she doesn't want her friends and family to know that she's not okay. And she finds that to be a recurring theme in her. I see lots of heads nodding. That's so
Yeah,
true. It's so important to find your safe people.
yeah, it's a tough one. Let's see. Are there any shared as far as creative ideas for managing grief and depression?
Oh, so many. A lot of people talked about looking at pictures and they were sort of confused at that sort of longing to sit and look at pictures because it makes them more sad and yet they feel good doing it. So I just wanted to validate that those linking objects have such a big pull. And Dr. Wolfeld actually calls that hello work. That when we have lost a precious person in our lives, that going back and revisiting pictures and videos and things like that really help us connect to who they were and what they brought to our lives.
Yeah. Yeah,
Beautiful.
it's well said. Yeah, the polarity is never an easy one. Almost feeling two different things at once. That's hard to manage, especially when the energy is low already. And, the feeling of some of the sadness associated with it may be overwhelming, for lack of a better word. But, you know, similar to what Alan says in his second need of mourning, embrace the pain of your loss, enjoy things in moderation, dose yourself and, take breaks when needed and, do everything you can to change it up. If you need to watch some silly movie, watch a silly movie. If you need to watch a horror film, watch a horror film. Um, you know, Moods are going to change. And, I think one of the most important things is to understand that everything that you're experiencing, you probably have asked yourself if you're crazy at one point or another, but it is normal and it is natural. And I'm sure what has been communicated in our chat in this time together, it's helped validate that this is a normal part of the experience of life, no matter how hard or how painful it is. Thank you, Patty. So I'm gonna close up with two announcements. First and foremost, I want to thank you for your time. Your time is extremely valuable, and I hope that you've got a lot out of this experience of this webinar. The first thing I want to say is if you do need more support, you actually, if you're watching this webinar on a computer and you have your phone handy, you can scan that QR code in the lower corner, and that'll open up the Grief Refuge app in your app store, and you can download it and you can use it. And part of the app is free, and part of it does require a subscription. And so there's options there. Most people think that you got to pay for the whole app. That's not true. There is a lot you can do, such as the journal feature. You can journal for free in the Grief Refuge app. And then in just less than a month, we're having another webinar. And the topic of the January 16th webinar is actually using plant medicine, natural plant medicine. I'm not talking about drugs. I'm talking about natural plant medicine for grief support. So I'll send a message about that later, but I just want to thank you. And I actually have a closing thought. It's something that I've found from my dear friend Patty. Patty's very active on Facebook, and I saw that she shared this, and I found this just to be like the icing on the cake for our experience. And so I'm gonna stop sharing so you can see this because I have the notes, and it's a closing thought. And this, I think it's a poem. It's either a poem or a reflection by a wonderful man named Jeff Foster. And in closing thoughts, he says this: the word depressed can be spoken as deep rest. We can choose to view depression not as a mental illness, but as a state of deep rest, a spiritual exhaustion that we enter into when we are depressed or pressed down by the weight of the false self, the mask, the mind-made story of me. We long to stop pretending and express our raw truth, to give voice to our secret loneliness, our shame, our broken hearts, boredom, and brilliant rage. Depression's call the truth, needs to be listened to and understood, not analyzed or medicated away. There is no shame in your exhaustion. We are all exhausted, my love. Slow down today. Allow yourself to rest deeply and weep and breathe and begin again. Now, I say, our depression is holy. It contains the seeds of new life. So I thank you for joining. And if you have any follow-up, oh, please reach out. You can go to the Grief Refuge website and enter in the contact there. You can actually, there's 3 ellipses buttons in the chat. You can actually save that. Hopefully you've made a new friend, exchanged some contact information in the chat today. And I hope to see you January 16th for the plant medicine webinar. Thank you, and wishing you all the very best for the rest of the 2023 year and into 2024. Take care.